They were built in secret, banned in silence, and buried so deep most people don't even know they existed. These weren't just controversial, they were dangerous, illegal, or so flawed that even the automakers tried to pretend they never happened. No ads, no press, no goodbye, just gone. These are 13 banned American cars so outrageous, so mysterious, so forbidden. The companies behind them still hope you never find out the truth. Number 1. The 1971 Oldsmobile Tornado GT W34 is one of those rare, wild relics from an era when American automakers were still experimenting with insane ideas and somehow managing to get them onto showroom floors. This car was the muscle car nobody expected. A hulking front-wheel drive coupe with a 455 cubic inch rocket V8 cranking out a mind-bending 400 horsepower and a mountain of torque, all fed directly to the front wheels. The result? A machine that looked like a luxury cruiser but drove like a caffeinated rhino on ice skates. Oldsmobile had already shocked the industry with the original Tornado in 1966. It was the first mass-produced front-wheel drive American car since the Cord 810 of the 1930s. But by 1971, the engineers at Olds had clearly decided that if you're going to do something weird, you might as well go all the way. That's where the GT W34 package came in. It added a performance camshaft, a higher stall torque converter, dual exhaust, and a 3.07 final drive ratio. On paper, it looked like muscle car heaven, a torque-rich brute that could go from 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, faster than many rear-drive competitors of the time. But paper didn't prepare anyone for what it was like to actually drive one, because all that horsepower and torque was going through the front wheels, the torque steer was absolutely ferocious. The moment you stomped the gas, the steering wheel would wrench itself sideways with enough force to genuinely injure a distracted driver. One auto journalist famously compared the experience to trying to walk a pit bull in a thunderstorm on roller skates. A former owner from Minnesota, with visible nostalgia and a touch of PTSD, said simply, "Felt like trying to ride a wild bull through a fog bank." The W34 turned the Tornado into something of a mythical beast in enthusiast circles. On a straight highway, it felt like a nuclear-powered steamliner, smooth, swift, and intimidating. But in town, it was a nightmare. The turning radius was massive. The weight, over 4,800 pounds, made it hard to stop. The massive hood stretched out for what felt like 6 counties. Visibility wasn't great, and the front-heavy layout didn't help handling. It understeered in corners like a barge drifting off course, and it chewed through tires like a starving raccoon at a buffet. Owners reported tire wear so bad that some resorted to rotating their tires every oil change just to keep the car drivable. Then there were the mechanical quirks. The Tornado's unique chain-driven TH425 transaxle setup, a marvel of engineering really, was complex and prone to grumbling under pressure. Servicing it wasn't easy, and many mechanics of the time simply didn't know what to make of it. Combine that with the W34's increased power load and aggressive driving style from owners, and reliability started to take a nosedive. Some dealers quietly advised buyers to stay away from the GT package altogether, calling it a hot rod in a tuxedo with a death wish. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the W34 package vanished soon after the 1971 model year, never to return. Officially, it was just quietly discontinued. Unofficially, it was likely a combination of tire lawsuits, customer complaints, insurance nightmares, and Oldsmobile's growing discomfort with building something so radically dangerous for the average buyer. It had become clear that the world wasn't ready for a 400 HP front-wheel drive rocket sled, especially not one without traction control, ABS, or even the vaguest hint of steering assist during full-throttle acceleration. Today, the 1971 Tornado GT W34 is a fascinating oddity, equal parts engineering milestone and cautionary tale. It's remembered as a glorious failure, audacious, overpowered, and fundamentally flawed in a way that makes you smile in disbelief. For muscle car fans, it's a unicorn. For former owners, it was a wild ride, sometimes too wild. And for the rest of the automotive world, it's a reminder of the early 1970s, when Detroit sometimes threw reason out the window and said, let's just see what happens. And what happened, in this case, was a muscle-bound luxury car that could scare the pants off its driver, if the torque steer didn't rip the steering wheel from their hands first. Number 2. The 1986 Chevrolet Sprint Turbo is one of those tiny turbocharged anomalies that could only have come from the strange twilight of the Reagan-era automotive landscape. Born from a collaboration between General Motors and Suzuki, the Sprint Turbo was supposed to be a fun, frugal city car with a sporty edge. And on paper, it almost made sense. A minuscule 3-cylinder engine with a turbocharger, pushing out a whopping 70 horsepower in a car that weighed barely 1,700 pounds soaking wet. But in practice, it was a jittery, skittish, and sometimes downright terrifying little box that felt like it had more in common with a lawnmower on Red Bull than a proper car. At first glance, the Sprint Turbo looked like any other innocuous hatchback of the era. Small, boxy, and painfully utilitarian. Most people wouldn't give it a second look in the parking lot unless they noticed the tiny turbo badge on the back. But under that stubby hood lurked an ambitious, if totally unrefined, powertrain. A 1.0-liter 3-cylinder engine with a turbo the size of a soup can, hooked up to a 5-speed manual. It was loud, buzzy, and had no business being that eager to party. The trouble started the moment you tried to actually use that turbocharged power. Below 3,000 RPM, the Sprint Turbo felt like a sewing machine dragging the fridge. But once the boost kicked in, suddenly, violently, and usually at the worst possible moment, it was like the car had been hit in the rear by a charging rhino. One moment you were puttering along in traffic, and the next you were hanging onto the wheel as the tiny hatchback surged forward with a ferocity completely unmatched by its budget-friendly appearance. As one Oregon owner put it bluntly, boost kicked in like a hammer, the brakes like wet toast. And those brakes, they were hopeless. Tiny drums in the back, undersized discs up front, and no ABS of any kind. Stopping the Sprint Turbo from highway speeds felt like trying to wrestle down a bowling ball with a pair of oven mitts. Combine that with laughably skinny tires, no traction control, and a body that felt like it might crumple in a stiff breeze, and you had a driving experience that was part comedy, part horror movie. The car darted nervously across lanes on the highway, bounced over potholes like a pogo stick, and felt utterly overwhelmed by any maneuver more aggressive than a lane change. Safety was a joke. The Sprint's crash performance was so dismal that regulators in several states openly questioned why GM was even selling it. In crash tests, the Sprint performed worse than almost anything else on the road. Not surprising, given it had roughly the structural rigidity of a cardboard box reinforced with zip ties. One auto journalist at the time quipped that you'd be better off in a go-kart wearing hockey pads. Owners, meanwhile, learned to fear intersections and freeway merges. More than a few slapped steel bars or makeshift reinforcements into the door panels in a desperate attempt to feel safe. GM itself seemed unsure of what to do with the Sprint Turbo. It received barely any advertising. Dealers didn't understand how to sell it, and the handful of enthusiasts who actually bought them did so for one reason. It was weird. It was one of the lightest and cheapest ways to get a turbocharged car in 1986, even if it felt like strapping yourself to a Roman candle every time you drove it. The car gained a cult following among tuners and weirdos who loved to swap engines, beef up the tiny turbo, and terrify themselves on local back roads. But for the average driver, the Sprint Turbo was too harsh, too fragile, and far too scary. In hindsight, the 1986 Chevrolet Sprint Turbo was a Frankenstein's monster of ambition and under-engineering. It tried to be quick and efficient at the same time, but ended up being neither particularly safe nor particularly good. It was dangerously light, unpredictably fast, and alarmingly underbraked. And yet, for a certain breed of thrill-seeking commuter or teenage daredevil, it was unforgettable. Like a caffeinated chihuahua with a jetpack, unpredictable, scrappy, and occasionally explosive. Today it's a rarity, more likely to be remembered through stories than seen on the road. Most rusted into the earth, crumpled in minor fender benders, or were run into the ground by owners who couldn't resist constantly winding them to redline. But those who drove one, really drove one, never forgot the sensation of tiny turbo lag followed by full boost chaos and the lingering realization that, once it was moving fast, stopping it was mostly a matter of luck and prayer. Number 3. The 1971 Oldsmobile Tornado GT W34 was one of the most audacious and polarizing muscle cars of its era. A bold experiment that dared to combine immense power with an unconventional front-wheel drive layout, resulting in a vehicle as fascinating as it was frightening. To truly appreciate the story of the W34, you have to understand that it came from a time when Detroit was willing to push boundaries, even if the results were wildly unpredictable and sometimes downright dangerous. When Oldsmobile first introduced the Tornado in 1970, it was a groundbreaking car, the first American production vehicle in decades to use front-wheel drive, wrapped in a stylish personal luxury coupe body. By 1971, the automaker decided to push the envelope even further with the GT W34 performance package, which transformed the already impressive Tornado into a front-wheel drive muscle car with a monstrous 455 cubic inch rocket V8 engine pumping out 400 horsepower and a staggering 510 lb-ft of torque. This package was intended to deliver thrilling speed and aggressive performance, but the engineering challenge of managing that power through the front wheels created some serious and sometimes terrifying handling quirks. The sheer torque generated by that engine, combined with the front-wheel drive setup, created one of the most violent torque steer experiences ever witnessed in a production car. Drivers described it as the steering wheel violently yanking out of their hands under hard acceleration, as if the car itself was trying to throw them off balance. Imagine stomping on the gas and feeling your wrists nearly snap as the wheels fought each other for grip. A former owner from Minnesota put it succinctly, "Felt like trying to ride a wild bull through a fog bank." This wasn't just a car, it was a wild beast barely held in check by engineering bravado. Despite the raw power and aggressive looks, the W34 was no simple performance upgrade. The 4,800-pound car was heavy, with a massive front end that made handling a challenge, especially around corners. Its enormous weight and torque steer made it prone to understeer, and the steering itself was heavy and unpredictable, particularly at high speeds or on slippery roads. The tires wore out so quickly under the strain that some owners joked they went through sets faster than oil changes. The complexity of the Tornado's front-wheel drive transaxle and the added stress from the W34 package made maintenance tricky and costly, further frustrating owners who had hoped for a high-performance but manageable cruiser. The interior was plush and filled with luxury touches typical of the era, wood grain accents, leather seats, and an array of gadgets. But none of these comforts could mask the car's wild, almost uncontrollable personality behind the wheel. The experience was a bizarre blend of luxury and menace, a car that looked refined but demanded the attention and respect of a race car driver. It was a thrill and a headache wrapped into one. Sales of the W34 performance package were limited, and by the end of 1971, Oldsmobile quietly discontinued it, likely due to concerns over safety, liability, and the strain it placed on tires and drivetrains. The muscle car market was also shifting rapidly toward more practical and less volatile machines, and the W34's dangerous reputation made it an easy target to cut. However, despite, or perhaps because of its rarity and infamy, the Tornado GT W34 has become a cult classic, celebrated among muscle car enthusiasts for its fearless attempt to defy conventions. Today, the 1971 Oldsmobile Tornado GT W34 stands as a vivid symbol of an era when Detroit engineers dared to defy norms and create something truly unique, sometimes at the expense of drivability and safety. It's remembered not just for its extraordinary power, but for the drama and danger that came with it. To drive one was to flirt with chaos, to tame a beast that could turn on you at any moment. For collectors, it represents a rare piece of muscle car history, a reminder that sometimes the most daring experiments leave behind stories as wild as the cars themselves. Number 4. The 1984 Chrysler Laser XT Turbo represents a striking example of 1980s automotive ambition, colliding headfirst with harsh reality. Chrysler set out with high hopes, aiming to capture the hearts of young, tech-savvy drivers who wanted a sleek, sporty coupe that combined futuristic styling with cutting-edge performance. Promoted as a turbocharged answer to the era's rising demand for affordable performance cars, the Laser XT Turbo was supposed to be the company's ticket back into the spotlight of the sporty compact segment dominated by the likes of the Ford Mustang, Chevrolet Camaro, and Nissan 300ZX. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing complex technology into production without adequate testing and refinement. At its core, the Laser XT Turbo was powered by a 2.2-liter inline-4 engine fitted with a turbocharger, promising brisk acceleration and lively performance that would rival larger V8-powered muscle cars from a previous generation. The turbocharged engine, in theory, was Chrysler's way of offering a high-output power plant without the fuel consumption and weight penalties of big-block V8s. However, under real-world conditions, the turbo system was anything but reliable. Owners quickly discovered that the turbocharger was prone to overheating, leading to frequent failures and costly repairs. Turbo lag was a constant frustration. There were unpredictable bursts of power followed by frustrating delays, which made the car feel jerky and difficult to control, especially in stop-and-go traffic or during spirited driving. What was supposed to be a highlight, the Laser's futuristic digital dashboard and electronic control systems, became a source of endless headaches. Dubbed the Christmas tree by disgruntled owners, the dashboard's array of blinking warning lights and gauges would flicker erratically, often without any real cause. The car's electronic systems, meant to monitor engine performance and driver information, were riddled with faulty sensors, wiring problems, and computer glitches that created a cacophony of false alarms. Drivers soon learned to ignore the dashboard's warnings altogether, but that only added to the anxiety because nobody wanted to miss an actual problem hidden among the constant barrage of alerts. Mechanics across the country struggled to keep the Laser XT Turbo running smoothly. The combination of complex electronic controls and a delicate turbo system made repairs expensive and time-consuming. Dealerships, overwhelmed by customer complaints and costly warranty repairs, became reluctant to stock the model or recommend it to buyers. This lack of dealer support sealed the Laser's fate, as word spread quickly that the car was a maintenance nightmare. Prospective buyers were deterred by stories of sudden engine failures, electrical gremlins, and the feeling that the car was always one step away from breaking down. Inside, the Laser's interior felt like a futuristic spaceship for its time, with digital gauges and modern styling cues. Yet, the plastic materials quickly showed their age, warping and cracking in the heat. The ride was stiff and unforgiving, with the suspension struggling to tame the car's abrupt power delivery. The promise of a nimble, sporty coupe evaporated as owners found themselves dealing with a car that was frustrating to drive and expensive to maintain. One owner lamented, "I bought this thing because it looked fast and modern, but driving it was like wrestling a gremlin that had no idea what it was doing." By the mid-1980s, the Laser XT Turbo had become an embarrassment for Chrysler. Sales tanked, and the model was quietly discontinued with little fanfare. The car failed to establish itself as a serious player in the sport compact or muscle car markets, overshadowed by more reliable and better-engineered competitors. Today, surviving examples of the Laser XT Turbo are rare, and most have been relegated to the scrapyard due to chronic mechanical issues and the difficulty of finding replacement parts. The legacy of the 1984 Chrysler Laser XT Turbo lives on as a vivid reminder of the pitfalls the automakers face when they prioritize style and hype over engineering reliability. It represents an era of bold experimentation, when turbocharging and electronics were just beginning to take hold, but were still far from perfected. For those who owned one, the experience was a roller coaster of hope, excitement, frustration, and regret. The Laser XT Turbo was a glimpse of what the future might have been, a sleek, fast, tech-filled machine. But it was also a stark lesson in how innovation can quickly turn to disappointment without careful execution. In the end, the Laser remains a fascinating chapter in automotive history. A car that dared to be different, but paid a steep price for its ambition. Number 5. The 1985 Bricklin SV1 stands as one of the most fascinating and ill-fated experiments in automotive history. A car born from visionary ambition, wrapped in futuristic styling, yet plagued by fundamental flaws that turned dreams into nightmares for its owners. Conceived by Canadian entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin, the SV1 was pitched as the world's first safety sports car, an idea that seemed revolutionary in an era when stricter safety regulations were transforming the automotive landscape. The car's distinctive gull-wing doors, which opened upward in dramatic fashion, and its bold use of acrylic resin bonded to fiberglass for the body panels made it look like a spaceship on wheels. Yet, beneath its striking appearance lurked a host of problems that quickly eroded the promise of safety, performance, and reliability. Malcolm Bricklin's vision was both unique and ambitious. Build a sports car that wouldn't just look fast and aggressive, but one that would actively protect its occupants in ways no other car could. The gull-wing doors were designed not just for flair, but to provide easier access and emergency exit, particularly in rollover accidents. The acrylic resin body panels were intended to be rust-proof and more impact-resistant than traditional steel, a futuristic answer to the corrosion and damage problems plaguing many cars of the era. But these innovations, while brilliant on paper, fell short in practice. The plastic panels were heavier than anticipated, causing the car to weigh down and suffer from sluggish acceleration. Worse, the body material was fragile and prone to cracking and discoloration, diminishing the car's aesthetic appeal within a short time. The drivetrain was another disappointment. The SV1 was powered by a modest 5.7-liter V8 engine sourced from AMC, which lacked the power to move the heavy car with enthusiasm. Drivers expecting muscle car acceleration were often let down by the SV1's slow 0-60 times and lack of sporty handling. The suspension, designed to prioritize comfort and safety, added to the boat-like driving feel. Instead of a nimble sports car, owners found themselves behind the wheel of something closer to a cumbersome cruiser that didn't match its exotic looks. Perhaps the most infamous issues surrounded the gull-wing doors, which became the car's Achilles heel. The massive, heavy doors often jammed or failed to latch properly, leaving owners trapped or struggling to open them in everyday use. There are numerous anecdotes from owners describing desperate moments where the doors refused to open, forcing them to climb out through the rear window or even break glass in emergencies. This ironic failure, doors meant to enhance safety becoming a safety hazard themselves, cast a long shadow over the car's reputation. Additionally, the door mechanisms were complex and expensive to repair, causing many owners to seek drastic solutions, like welding the doors shut or replacing them with conventional hinges. Electrical gremlins haunted the SV1 as well. The car's wiring was notoriously unreliable, leading to frequent electrical failures that affected everything from lights to ignition systems. Early models suffered from poor build quality, with misaligned panels, leaking seals, and inconsistent fit and finish that made owners feel like they had purchased a prototype rather than a finished production car. The promised safety features, including heavy-duty bumpers and energy-absorbing interiors, were overshadowed by these quality control issues. Production woes only compounded the problems. The car was built in a hastily assembled factory in Nova Scotia, where inexperienced workers and supply chain hiccups slowed output and increased costs. Bricklin's aggressive timelines and constant design changes made it difficult for the factory to maintain quality, and reports of parts shortages and assembly line mistakes were common. Financial pressures mounted rapidly, leading to an underfunded company that struggled to support dealers and customers. Warranty repairs and recalls drained resources, while negative press about mechanical failures and safety concerns scared away potential buyers. Despite its promise and bold design, the SV1's market performance was disastrous. Only about 20,800 units were produced over 2 years before the company folded amid mounting debts and lawsuits. Dealers abandoned the brand, and many owners found themselves unable to get parts or proper service. The car quickly faded from public consciousness, remembered more as a quirky failure than a milestone in automotive innovation. Yet, the Bricklin SV1 endures as a cult classic, a rare and unusual collector's car with a fascinating backstory. For enthusiasts, it represents a moment in time when visionaries dared to think differently and challenge automotive norms. Its dramatic gull-wing doors still draw crowds, and its story serves as a reminder of the fine line between innovation and overreach. Number 6. The 1969 Chevrolet K5 Blazer with the 396 big block engine stands as one of the most fascinating and rarely discussed what-if stories in American automotive history. It's a tale of ambition, engineering audacity, and ultimately harsh mechanical reality. A story about a vehicle that could have rewritten the book on what an early full-size SUV was capable of, but instead became a cautionary legend buried deep in GMA's archives. In the late 1960s, the full-size SUV market was in its infancy. The Chevrolet K5 Blazer had just been introduced in 1969 as a rugged, no-nonsense off-roader built on the company's full-size truck platform. Its appeal was simple: utility, toughness, and decent power from a range of engines that included inline sixes and small block V8s. But somewhere in the minds of GM engineers and executives, there was a burning question. What if we slammed one of our most potent muscle car engines, the legendary 396 cubic inch big block V8, into that boxy, capable chassis? The 396 was no slouch. It was a powerhouse known for its roaring sound, massive torque, and brute acceleration in muscle cars like the Chevelle SS and Camaro. The idea was tantalizing: combine muscle car fury with off-road capability, and you'd have a beast that could dominate both highways and dirt trails. GM proceeded to build a prototype that literally shoved the 396 under the hood of a first-generation K5 Blazer. At first glance, it was a sight to behold, the familiar rugged SUV shape with a heart of pure muscle. But fitting such a massive engine into a chassis that was never designed for that kind of power was a monumental engineering challenge. The 396 engine was large and heavy, and the cramped engine bay left little room for proper cooling or heat dispersion. Early tests revealed a glaring problem: overheating. The cooling system, originally designed for smaller engines, couldn't handle the massive heat generated by the big block. Test drivers recounted driving sessions where the engine bay became unbearably hot, with heat radiating through the hood and bleeding into the passenger compartment. On longer runs, temperatures soared, risking engine damage and breakdowns. But the trouble didn't stop there. The K5 Blazer's frame, built to endure the stresses of a moderate V8 and off-road rigors, was suddenly under siege from the monstrous torque of the 396. The prototype's chassis began to show signs of structural stress, bending and flexing beyond safe limits during acceleration and rough terrain tests. Engineers were alarmed. The frame was literally being twisted and strained in ways that compromised safety and durability. This wasn't just a minor problem, it struck at the very foundation of the vehicle's engineering integrity. Meanwhile, the drivetrain and transmission proved ill-equipped to handle the surge of power. The transmission, a crucial link between the engine and wheels, repeatedly failed under the strain. Each test run ended with broken gears, burnt clutches, and transmission cases cracked under pressure. The cost of rebuilding or upgrading the drivetrain to handle the 396's output was astronomical and would have required a complete redesign, effectively meaning the prototype was a dead end as a production model. As one veteran GM technician from that era recalled, "We were chasing a dream, but the hardware just couldn't keep up. Every time we thought we fixed one problem, another blew up." The handling of the Blazer was another disappointment. The heavy big block engine shifted the vehicle's weight distribution dramatically forward, making the steering feel sluggish and imprecise. The suspension, tuned for a lighter load, couldn't keep the vehicle stable during quick maneuvers or off-road challenges. The result was a beast that looked aggressive, but felt unwieldy and unpredictable behind the wheel. Far from the nimble muscle SUV many envisioned, the prototype behaved more like a lumbering truck, with too much power and too little control. All these compounding problems led to a swift end to the project. GM executives, faced with the engineering challenges and high costs, pulled the plug on the 396 K5 Blazer experiment. The decision was pragmatic. Better to focus on proven engine options and chassis combinations than to risk the company's reputation and resources on an underdeveloped concept. The muscle blazer would have to wait for decades until advancements in materials, suspension technology, and drivetrain components finally made such a powerful off-road SUV viable. Today, the 1969 Chevrolet K5 Blazer 396 prototype remains a legendary what-if car among collectors and enthusiasts. It embodies the spirit of American automotive boldness, a willingness to push the envelope even when the odds are stacked against success. Its story is a vivid reminder of the brutal realities behind car design. No matter how powerful or exciting an engine might be, the entire vehicle must be engineered as a cohesive. Number 7. The 1992 Dodge Daytona iRock RT is one of those rare, fascinating stories in American automotive history that embodies both brilliance and tragedy. An incredibly capable and surprisingly sophisticated performance car that was overshadowed, neglected, and almost erased by its own manufacturer. In many ways, the Daytona iRock RT was ahead of its time, blending turbocharged power, sharp handling, and a distinctive personality, yet it remains one of the most underrated and overlooked American sports cars of the early 90s. Underneath its sleek and deceptively simple exterior, the 1992 Daytona iRock RT packed a serious punch. Its heart was a turbocharged 2.2-liter dual overhead and four-cylinder engine, producing a remarkable 224 horsepower. A figure that might seem modest today, but was highly competitive for compact sport coupes of that era. This wasn't just a fast commuter, it was a car built for performance, with a turbocharger that delivered punchy, responsive acceleration, providing a thrilling driving experience. What truly distinguished the Daytona iRock RT was its Lotus-tuned suspension. Lotus, renowned worldwide for crafting some of the most finely balanced and responsive chassis, worked with Dodge to transform the Daytona's handling from mediocre to genuinely exhilarating. The suspension gave the car razor-sharp steering, excellent cornering grip, and a poised ride that challenged the stereotype of American front-wheel drive coupes as numb and uninspired. Yet, despite these remarkable qualities, the Dodge Daytona iRock RT became a victim of corporate politics and market positioning within Chrysler. Around the same time, Chrysler was gearing up to launch the Dodge Viper, a wildly ambitious and muscular sports car designed to capture attention and redefine the brand's image. The Viper was destined to be the company's halo car, a symbol of pure American performance and excitement. Executives at Chrysler feared that promoting the Daytona iRock RT too aggressively would detract from the Viper's impact, potentially cannibalizing sales or confusing consumers. So instead of highlighting the Daytona's unique strengths, Dodge kept it largely under wraps. Advertising budgets were slashed, dealership salespeople were often uninformed or unsure how to market it, and the car quickly faded into the background as a niche curiosity rather than a serious contender in the sports coupe market. For those who did manage to buy and drive the Daytona iRock RT, the experience was something special. Owners spoke with amazement about how this modest-looking coupe could suddenly come alive under throttle. The turbocharged engine provided a surge of power that felt much more aggressive than its displacement suggested, giving the car a launch that could surprise many muscle cars of the era. The Lotus-tuned suspension meant that, unlike many of its competitors, the Daytona didn't just blast straight ahead, it danced through corners with surprising agility and confidence, feeling planted and connected to the road in a way that delighted drivers. One owner from Illinois summed it up perfectly. It was the fastest thing I ever drove that no one believed existed. This car was a secret weapon, a rare find for enthusiasts who knew how to appreciate it. However, this hidden gem came with serious drawbacks that contributed to its obscurity. Parts were difficult to find. Since Dodge had little incentive to support a model, they were essentially sidelining. Owners often found themselves repairing or sourcing components on their own, becoming amateur mechanics just to keep the cars running smoothly. Resale values plummeted as the model disappeared from public awareness, and many potential buyers passed it by, unaware of its true capabilities. Even among Dodge enthusiasts, the Daytona iRock RT was often overshadowed by flashier or more heavily promoted models, leaving it stranded as a cult favorite rather than a mainstream success. In retrospect, the 1992 Dodge Daytona iRock RT stands as a bittersweet testament to what might have been. Here was a car that married American turbocharged muscle with European caliber suspension tuning, wrapped in a sharp, sporty package that could have competed with the best of the early 90s sport coupes if only it had been given a fighting chance. Instead, it became a fascinating footnote, a sleeper car before the term became trendy, beloved by a handful of true aficionados but ignored by the masses. Today, as the market for unique and overlooked performance cars grows, the Daytona iRock RT has finally started to receive the appreciation it deserves. Collectors seek it out as a rare piece of Dodge history, a car that offers not just nostalgia but genuine driving excitement and an intriguing story of corporate missteps and lost potential. For those fortunate enough to own one or even just drive it, the 1992 Dodge Daytona iRock RT remains a thrilling reminder that greatness sometimes comes in quiet. Number 8. The 1974 Ford Grand Torino Sport, Type N Code 460, is a wild relic from a time when American muscle car makers chased raw, uncompromising power with little regard for refinement or practicality. At a glance, slapping Ford's legendary 460 cubic inch V8, a massive big block engine known more for hauling and towing than road manners, into a sporty Gran Torino seemed like a recipe for a muscle car legend. But what arrived was far from the sleek, balanced powerhouse enthusiasts might have hoped for. Instead, it was a gargantuan beast that challenged everything we expect from a muscle car: agility, fuel economy, and even basic drivability. Owners who actually got their hands on this rare and unusual beast quickly discovered a litany of contradictions and frustrations. The 460 engine, with its brute force and monstrous torque, gave the Torino an undeniably aggressive personality. There was no mistaking the thunderous roar under the hood or the sheer rawness of its acceleration. When it pulled hard, launching with a surge that could catch you off guard. But this strength came at a steep price. The Torino's chassis and suspension, originally designed for smaller engines, were ill-equipped to handle such prodigious power and weight. Instead of feeling nimble or athletic, the car lumbered with the grace of a battleship. Cornering was an exercise in patience, the massive front end pushing wide under even mild acceleration. The steering felt heavy and unresponsive, and the suspension leaned deeply into every turn, making every twist and bend a challenge to master. Many owners confessed to driving more cautiously than they wanted, simply to keep the car from feeling out of control. Perhaps even worse than its unwieldy handling was the car's infamous thirst for fuel. The 460 V8 was a gas guzzler of epic proportions. Owners joked that they could watch the gas gauge drop in real time, as if the engine was a vacuum cleaner for fuel. Regular stops at the pump became a way of life, sometimes several times a week, depending on driving habits. This monstrous appetite for premium fuel made daily driving an expensive proposition and limited the car's practicality. In a period already grappling with rising fuel prices and emissions regulations, the Gran Torino Sport Type N Code 460 seemed almost willfully oblivious to the realities of the road and the market. Adding insult to injury were persistent cooling problems. The enormous engine generated intense heat, especially in stop-and-go traffic or hot weather. The stock cooling systems often struggled to keep up, causing overheating headaches and reliability issues. Owners reported frequent overheating episodes that contributed to a general sense of mechanical fragility. The combination of excessive weight, poor handling, relentless fuel consumption, and cooling issues painted a grim picture for the 460 Torino's future. Not surprisingly, Ford discontinued the Type N Code 460 option partway through the 1974 model year, quietly pulling the plug on what was essentially an overambitious experiment. Dealers struggled to explain the car to buyers, many of whom were lured in by the promise of raw power, but quickly realized they'd purchased a cumbersome, thirsty, and somewhat temperamental beast. Owners who lived with the car found themselves making compromises or modifications to try to improve handling and cooling, but the fundamental flaws remained. Yet despite all its faults, the Gran Torino Sport Type N Code 460 holds a strange fascination today. It's a symbol of an era when muscle cars could be reckless in their ambition, where sheer cubic inches and horsepower were prioritized above all else. It represents a fleeting moment when bigger really did mean better, until it didn't. The car's outsized personality, uncompromising power, and notorious quirks have earned it a cult following among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate it as a raw and unfiltered expression of American muscle car excess. One longtime owner summed up the paradox perfectly. It looked like a muscle car, sounded like a monster, but handled like a drunk cruiser and drank fuel like a river. It was an adrenaline junkie's nightmare and a gas station attendant's nightmare rolled into one. That blunt assessment captures the essence of the Type N Code 460 Torino, an unforgettable beast that burned bright and fast but ultimately proved too wild for its own good. Number 9. The 1980 Chevrolet Monza Spyder V8 California Spec stands as one of the more curious and cautionary tales in American muscle car history, a tale where ambition, regulation, and harsh reality collided in a perfect storm of disappointment and mechanical trouble. For muscle car fans who lived through the era or learned about it later, the Monza Spyder V8 was supposed to be a fun, compact muscle car, packing a small block V8 punch beneath a sleek, sporty coupe body. It promised the thrill of power and performance, wrapped in the approachable size of a Monza. But California, with its notoriously strict emissions regulations and environmental laws in the late 1970s and early 1980s, had other plans. The car that finally reached showrooms in the Golden State was neutered, burdened by emissions equipment and compromises that sapped its very soul. At the heart of the problem was the small block V8 engine itself. While the engine had potential for respectable performance in theory, the Monza Spyder's California spec version was burdened with a thick stack of emissions controls, catalytic converters, air injection pumps, exhaust gas recirculation, EGR valves, and lean fuel mixtures. This bureaucratic chokehold on the engine strangled its ability to breathe, severely limiting horsepower and torque. Owners who had dreamed of the classic muscle car thunder instead got an engine that sputtered, struggled, and gasped for air. Acceleration was sluggish, the throttle response dull, and the roar that muscle car enthusiasts coveted was reduced to a quiet cough. It was as if the car was trying desperately to keep up appearances while undercut by invisible chains. But the performance disappointments were just the beginning. The Monza Spyder V8 was plagued by serious and dangerous mechanical issues that made ownership a stressful experience. The small block engine, when forced to run under these harsh conditions with excessive emissions equipment, generated enormous amounts of heat. Unfortunately, the cooling system and engine bay design weren't equipped to handle this excess heat effectively. Owners reported engine bays warping from overheating, hoses and wiring melting, and in the worst cases, actual fires erupting under the hood. The situation became so dire that many owners found themselves carrying fire extinguishers as a practical necessity rather than a mere precaution. One vivid owner memory echoes this anxiety. Driving the Monza Spyder felt like walking a tightrope with gasoline pouring at your feet. Every time I popped the hood, I was half expecting to see flames licking out. These problems, combined with the car's poor performance, quickly turned the dream into a nightmare. For Chevrolet, the situation rapidly spiraled out of control. Once the extent of the problems became clear, and with word spreading about the fire risks and mechanical failures, dealers in California began refusing to sell the Monza Spyder V8, and the state's regulators effectively banned it from sale. Only a few dozen of these cars ever made it into customer hands in California, making it one of the rarest and most notorious muscle car variants ever produced. Dealers were stuck with unsold inventory, and Chevrolet had to deal with a public relations embarrassment that highlighted the growing challenges muscle cars face during this era of tightening emissions and safety regulations. The whole episode became a sobering lesson on the limits of muscle car ambition in the face of environmental realities and regulatory pressure. The Monza Spyder V8 was a car caught between worlds, a hopeful muscle coupe neutered into compliance, yet still burdened by a powerful engine that wasn't properly tamed or supported. It had neither the thrilling performance muscle car fans desired, nor the reliability or safety needed for daily driving. Today, the 1980 California spec Chevrolet Monza Spyder V8 stands as a rare collector's curiosity and a powerful reminder of a turbulent period in automotive history. It embodies the clash between raw American muscle and the emerging regulatory environment that would forever change the landscape of performance cars. While it never achieved the legendary status of classic muscle icons, its story remains fascinating, a mixture of promise, frustration, and caution. As one former owner Riley noted, it was a fire hazard masquerading as a muscle car, a handful of horsepower trapped in a ticking time bomb. That haunting image perfectly sums up a car that could have been so much more, but ended up as a mechanical nightmare and a fleeting footnote in the saga of American muscle. Number 10. The 1962 Pontiac Tempest Super Duty 421 occupies a unique and almost legendary place in muscle car history, a car that simultaneously embodies raw, unfiltered power and the harsh reality of engineering limits pushed too far. Conceived during an era when American manufacturers were locked in a fierce battle to outdo one another on horsepower and performance, the Tempest Super Duty 421 was Pontiac's audacious attempt to create a factory-built race car that could compete at the highest levels of drag racing and muscle car performance. Yet, despite its immense potential, it quickly earned a reputation as much for its mechanical fragility as for its blistering speed. Only 6 of these rare machines were ever produced, making the Super Duty 421 one of the rarest muscle cars to come out of the early 1960s. At the heart of this beast was Pontiac's monstrous 421 cubic inch V8 engine, a powerhouse designed to churn out breathtaking horsepower and torque figures. Numbers that, on paper, promised to leave rivals choking in its dust. The engine was paired with an innovative rear-mounted transaxle, a design choice that gave the car a near-perfect 50-50 weight distribution, theoretically allowing it to launch with blistering traction and corner with surprising agility for a muscle car of its size and power. However, this bold engineering gamble came with a fatal flaw. The drivetrain components simply were not ready for the sheer brutality of the engine's output. The torque generated by the 421 V8 overwhelmed the rear transaxle and its associated components. Drive shafts twisted and snapped with alarming frequency, axles fractured like brittle twigs under the stress, and the entire drivetrain seemed to implode under the stress of handling that raw force. The car quickly earned a grim nickname among its engineers and mechanics, the Bone Crusher, a term that captured the brutal way it seemed to break itself apart while trying to unleash its fury on the asphalt. Efforts to reinforce and upgrade the drivetrain were continuous, but ultimately unsuccessful. Engineers experimented with stronger materials, reworked suspension setups, and tried different configurations to tame the beast. But the fundamental design of the transaxle could not handle the overwhelming torque without catastrophic failures. The car's vicious power was a double-edged sword. While it could annihilate opponents in a straight line, it was almost guaranteed to break itself down in the process. In the end, Pontiac quietly shelved the project, choosing to abandon the Super Duty 421 as a production model and instead focus on more conventional performance packages that promised greater reliability. One longtime crew member vividly recalled the frustration and awe surrounding the car. You had to respect it. That engine had more bite than anything else out there, but every time we pushed it, it took parts with it. We weren't just racing the clock, we were racing how long the drivetrain would hold together. Most times it didn't last. This honest, gritty recollection captures the paradox of the Tempest Super Duty 421, a machine of terrifying power and potential, hampered by a fatal weakness that kept it from ever realizing its full promise. Today, the 1962 Pontiac Tempest Super Duty 421 stands as one of the most enigmatic and coveted muscle cars of its era. Its rarity alone makes it a holy grail for collectors and enthusiasts. But it's the story behind the car, the story of unmatched ambition, engineering innovation, and spectacular failure, that elevates it to mythic status. The Bone Crusher is a stark reminder of a time when muscle car manufacturers raced to push the limits of technology and performance, often skating dangerously close to disaster. It is a tribute to the raw, unyielding spirit of 1960s American automotive engineering, where power and speed were king, but control and durability were still evolving. More than anything, the Tempest Super Duty 421 is a story about the price of chasing horsepower without compromise. The fine line between creating a legendary muscle car and engineering a machine destined to destroy itself. For those who understand its history, the car remains a haunting symbol of both possibility and peril, a roaring beast that briefly burst onto the scene before vanishing into the shadows of muscle car lore. Its legacy endures not just in the few surviving examples, but in the lessons it left behind for generations of engineers and car enthusiasts striving to harness power without losing control. Number 11. The 1982 Lincoln Continental V6 diesel stands as one of the most bizarre and infamous chapters in American luxury car history, a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry and desperate cost-cutting that left owners deeply disappointed and often outright furious. At a time when the entire American auto industry was grappling with skyrocketing fuel prices, increasingly strict emissions regulations, and a rapidly changing market hungry for economy, Lincoln's flagship model found itself thrust into a strange experiment that ultimately betrayed everything the brand promised: quiet, effortless luxury. The decision to shoehorn a diesel engine into the Continental, a model known for its smooth, powerful V8s and elegant presence, was made primarily out of desperation. Ford sought a way to offer better fuel economy without completely redesigning the car or losing the prestige associated with the Lincoln nameplate. The solution? Adapt an existing diesel V6 engine, sourced from an overseas supplier, and bolted into the chassis of a massive luxury sedan. On paper, this seemed like a clever compromise, a smaller, more fuel-efficient power plant that could meet tightening regulations without compromising the size or luxury of the car. But in reality, it was a recipe for disaster. The diesel V6 was noisy, rough, and utterly at odds with the smooth, refined experience Lincoln buyers expected. Instead of a whisper-quiet ride, owners reported an intrusive clatter that sounded more like old farm machinery than a premium luxury car. It idled like a tractor and smelled like an old bus, one disgruntled owner famously said. The engine's harsh vibrations and loud diesel clatter echoed throughout the cabin, undermining the very essence of what made a Lincoln feel special. Performance was another sore point. The diesel engine was sluggish, lumbering, and lacked the effortless power delivery that buyers were accustomed to. Merging onto highways or overtaking slower traffic became a test of patience rather than an exercise in smooth acceleration. Many owners felt embarrassed as the Continental V6 diesel seemed ill-suited for the luxury car image it was trying to uphold. Instead of gliding down the road with grace, it trudged along with the urgency of a tired workhorse. Reliability only added insult to injury. The diesel power plant was notorious for refusing to start in colder weather, leaving drivers stranded on frigid mornings. Stalling and other drivability issues were common, often requiring expensive repairs. Warranty claims soared, putting enormous strain on Ford's service network. Owners who had paid a premium price for what they thought was a top-tier luxury vehicle were instead saddled with a noisy, slow, and temperamental car that felt like a compromise in every sense. The backlash was swift and merciless. The diesel engine was dropped after just one model year, disappearing from the lineup quietly and without fanfare. Dealers were instructed to downplay the diesel option, and the marketing materials soon omitted any mention of the ill-fated powertrain. For many, the 1982 Lincoln Continental V6 diesel became a collector's oddity, a rare car with a strange legacy and a reputation as one of the biggest missteps in Lincoln's history. Owners who lived through the experience often recall the diesel Continental with a mix of disbelief and frustration. It felt like driving a tractor that forgot it wasn't supposed to be a limo, one owner deadpanned. Another lamented that the car was so noisy and unreliable it made me question why I ever bought a Lincoln. These candid reflections reveal just how wide the gulf was between expectation and reality, a gulf that the diesel Continental could never bridge. Looking back, the 1982 Lincoln Continental V6 diesel is a vivid lesson in what happens when luxury, engineering, and market pressures collide in the wrong way. It's a stark reminder that cutting corners on powertrain choice to chase fuel economy goals can backfire spectacularly, especially in a segment where refinement and performance are paramount. This rare and ill-fated model now stands as a quirky footnote in automotive history, a fascinating relic of a turbulent era that tested the limits of American luxury car making. Though it faded quickly from the market and from memory, the diesel Continental left behind a legacy that still intrigues collectors and automotive historians. It remains a symbol of how even the most prestigious brands can stumble when innovation is rushed or miscalculated. And for those who owned one, it's a story of patience, frustration, and enduring a car that never quite lived up to the Lincoln name. Number 12. The 1977 Plymouth Trail Duster Sport Utility concept was Plymouth's daring yet ill-fated leap into the nascent SUV market, a segment just beginning to ignite enthusiasm among American buyers hungry for vehicles that could combine off-road ruggedness with everyday passenger comfort. At a time when traditional car makers were scrambling to find their footing amid shifting consumer tastes and rising fuel concerns, Plymouth envisioned the Trail Duster as a bold new chapter, a rugged, family-friendly SUV to sit alongside the Dodge Ram Charger, but tailored to Plymouth's slightly different customer base. On paper, the concept was promising. A sturdy chassis, a roomy interior, and off-road capability that could finally put Plymouth on the SUV map. But beneath that hopeful surface lurked a series of disastrous design flaws and engineering missteps that doomed the vehicle before it ever saw production. From the earliest stages of development, it became painfully clear that the Trail Duster's prototype roof and structural components were dangerously flawed. The design included innovative roof panels and roll bars intended to provide strength and safety without compromising the sleek lines or interior space. Yet during testing, these very features proved catastrophic. Water leaks became the least of the problems. The roof panels leaked relentlessly even under the gentlest rainfall, flooding the cabin and soaking any belongings inside to it. Worse, the roof structure itself flexed excessively over rough terrain, raising serious questions about the vehicle's durability and occupant safety. The prototype's vulnerabilities were painfully exposed during rigorous off-road trials in the harsh deserts of Arizona. These were not gentle drives, but brutal tests designed to push the Trail Duster to its limits. Tough terrain, steep inclines, and rapid elevation changes. Instead of standing firm, the roof began to flex alarmingly, to the point where engineers and drivers alike feared catastrophic failure. In one harrowing incident that has since become legend among automotive insiders, the roof panel literally separated from the vehicle while the test driver was behind the wheel. The windshield cracked under the stress, sending shards of glass into the cabin and terrifying the occupants. The vehicle, designed to be a safe and reliable SUV, suddenly felt more like a dangerous experiment on wheels. Such structural failures were more than just inconvenient. They represented an existential threat to the project. Roll bars, which are supposed to protect passengers during a rollover, became a cruel joke when the roof could no longer be trusted to stay intact. The engineering team faced a crisis. The Trail Duster was too weak to survive serious off-road use, and these safety flaws could not be overlooked or patched with minor tweaks. The nightmare scenario of a roof detaching mid-drive was a black mark that Plymouth simply could not afford. Faced with mounting safety concerns and the prospect of a vehicle that could not meet even basic durability standards, Plymouth's executives made the difficult decision to kill the Trail Duster concept outright. The project was quietly shelved, and the SUV that might have given Plymouth a foothold in a rapidly growing segment was never produced. Instead, Dodge continued to sell the Ram Charger for several years, while Plymouth dealers were left without an SUV offering to match rising consumer demand. For many years, the Trail Duster concept lived on only in internal documents and the whispered stories of engineers and test drivers who witnessed its dramatic failure firsthand. The leaks, structural failures, and terrifying on-road incidents became a case study in how rushing development and failing to rigorously test safety-critical systems can doom even the most promising projects. It was a stark reminder that entering a new demanding market segment like SUVs requires more than just ambition. It demands flawless engineering, thorough testing, and an unwavering commitment to safety. Today, the 1977 Plymouth Trail Duster Sport utility concept remains a cautionary tale of what can go wrong when a manufacturer stretches too far without the necessary technical foundation. It is a fascinating what-if in automotive history, illustrating both Plymouth's ambition to innovate and the harsh realities of automotive engineering. While the SUV segment would explode in popularity in the decades that followed, Plymouth's brief and troubled flirtation with the idea ended in disappointment and withdrawal. The Trail Duster's legacy is a reminder that even bold visions can falter without the solid groundwork of design and engineering, a lesson as relevant now as it was nearly half a century ago.